It's quite normal for us to read this story and question the parenting skills of Mary and Joseph. How did they not know their 12-year-old was not with them for at least most of a day? And we can give some plausible explanations for what happened, such as they were traveling with a group of people, probably extended family, probably with other kids present in the group, and Jesus, who was in that culture on the cusp of adulthood, was not the child that they really thought they needed to pay attention to. They thought they had to pay attention to the younger kids and that Jesus could probably take care of himself. It's also possible, and I like this explanation best, that Jesus was with them as they started to leave Jerusalem. He was in the group, and in a devious and sneaky way, he split off from the group without telling anybody. Maybe this is more a story that's akin to a teenager sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night than it is to neglectful parents. And that explanation would also jibe with the disrespectful attitude that Jesus has when his mother finally finds him. His mother says, "How could you treat us this way?" And Jesus responds, "Why are you asking me that? Didn't you know I'd be with my Father?" Or some translations say, "Didn't you know I would be about my Father's work?" And I think this is the real heart of the story. Because with this exchange, the Gospel of Luke introduces a tension that will continue to unfold throughout this gospel between the duty of Jesus to his biological family and the duty of Jesus to God. And therefore, as followers of Jesus, inviting us to reflect on our duties to our biological families and our duties to God. And this theme will come up 3 more times at least in the Gospel of Luke, and in ways that are some of the most challenging passages in the entire Gospel. In Luke 8, we are told that Jesus is in a house and there's so many people crowded around that his mother and his brothers show up and they want to come and talk to him, but they can't get in because of the crowd. So the message is passed to Jesus that his mother and brothers are out there, and Jesus says, "Who are my mother and brothers?" My mother and brothers are those who follow the will of God and do it. And it gets worse. In Luke 12, Jesus says, "Do you think I have come to bring peace on earth? No, I have come to bring division. From now on, 5 in one house will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. And then in Luke 14, the harshest of them all, Jesus says, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple." It's heavy stuff, of course, and we shouldn't take it literally. But the question of who is your true family was a critical one for the early church. It reflects the reality at the time that a person's identity as a Christian could very well result in them being disowned by their family. And when that happened, the church would become their alternate family, or the words we might use today is the church would become their chosen family. All these verses that were just read testify to this reality within the early church. The theme of who is your family, or who are your people, we could say, also had to do with another factor that was happening during that time, which was urbanization. And so as the Gospel of Luke was being written, lots of people from the rural areas were coming into the cities. And when they did that, they were getting disconnected from their extended family networks, and they were getting disconnected from their ways of providing for themselves. When that happened, the church in the city became alternative family or alternative community, an alternative social structure. Still today, we see this exact dynamic at work. We see a person's political allegiance as something that can divide a family. A Democrat and a Republican family, or a Republican and Democrat family. A person's gender identity can divide a family and cause a person to be ostracized. A person's religious identity still. In a Jewish family, someone who becomes Christian or Muslim. Christian family, someone who becomes Jewish or Muslim, or all the iterations of that. We think of families as the strongest bond there is, but in some ways they're incredibly fragile. Because if you transgress certain unwritten rules, you can quickly be marginalized out of some families. And then in those cases, the religious community, the faith community, can become the alternative or chosen family. Also, on the geographic dislocation theme, churches still today can be safe havens for immigrants. So when an immigrant comes to a new country like the US, they don't speak the language, they'll often seek out a faith community which is formed by other people who speak their language. That's why you get Latino churches and Korean churches and all the different kinds of churches, because people need the social support of a church when they have been geographically dislocated. So hold on to that idea for the moment of churches being alternative communities or families or social structures. Let's move now to the very end of this passage, where it says that 12-year-old Jesus, after this tension, this little conflict with his mom, ends up returning home and being obedient. And then it says he, quote, grows in wisdom and years, in divine and human favor. Now notice something theological here. It might be easy to miss. Jesus grows. Jesus improves in divine favor. As he gets older, he becomes more faithful, more holy, deepens his relationship with God. Jesus is the most human in the Gospel of Luke. Or to say that the other way, the Gospel of Luke portrays Jesus as the most human of the four Gospels. So for instance, in Luke, Jesus prays and feels a need to pray. If Jesus were one with God, he wouldn't need to pray. In Luke, Jesus rests and seeks out rest regularly. He's often looking for ways to escape the demands of his ministry. In Luke, Jesus has emotions. He feels compassion, he grieves, he feels anxiety. The Gospel of Luke is the one where it says that in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was so anxious, so worried, so fraught that he sweat drops of blood, sort of this metaphorical expression of how anxious he felt. And then here in our story today, Jesus is a child on the cusp of adulthood who's struggling to balance loyalty to his family and loyalty to God as he grows and matures in divine and human favor. And that brings us to the questions that I'd like us to sort of reflect on today, this morning, whatever this is. If Jesus needed to grow, of all people, if Jesus needed to grow in wisdom and maturity, then don't we all? Have any of us arrived at a place, no matter how old we are or how much we've been through, have any of us arrived at a place where we no longer need to grow as people? Of course not. So then, how will we grow in the coming year? And will we do that with intention? And will we do that consciously? Because you can grow whether you like it or not. Because life can just hit you over the head and you can grow through the school of hard knocks, whether you like it or not. But can we be conscious and intentional about the direction we want to grow? Can we seek to cooperate with God as God forms us into the people that God wants us to be? Author James Clear wrote a book called Atomic Habits about the ways that we can, in fact, intentionally shape the people that we are becoming by choosing the habits that we practice every day. The small things we do every single day, day in and day out. So if you want to be a healthy person, right? It's not just about eating one healthy meal and now I'm a healthy person. Becoming a healthy person is about eating healthy meals every single day, or maybe even just changing what we eat for breakfast so we have a healthy breakfast every single day. Now we're starting to become a healthier person. If we want to be a more creative person, it means we practice our art form, whatever that is. Writing or pottery or gardening, whatever we're doing, we practice it every day, and that's how we become more creative, not just by wishing or hoping or doing it one time. If we want to be more loving and kind, that's not just a feeling that we try to have, it's a practice. We try to find ways to practice kindness every day. James Clear puts it this way: every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity. This is one reason why meaningful change doesn't require radical change. Small habits can make a meaningful difference by providing evidence that we are becoming a new person. Now, to tie this all to the blessing of the devices, if there's one habit that many of us share, for good or for ill, it's our dependence on these devices. Again, not necessarily bad. People right now are worshiping with us in a way that they might not be able to if they weren't using these devices. At the same time, if I hadn't taken your devices away at the beginning of the service, you might be checking your email right now and being distracted, and people at home could be doing that too. So maybe that's not so great. And then there's numerous studies out there that show that excessive use of smartphones actually contributes to poor mental health in multiple ways across the board. So what are your smartphone habits? What kind of person are those habits creating? Are we doom scrolling? Are we clicking on the most sensational stories? Are we comparing ourselves to the carefully curated but likely false images that people present on social media? Are we being intentional, on the other hand, about consuming positive content and making positive choices? Are we putting positivity out there with our comments and our shares? Are we using these devices primarily to stay in touch with loved ones and to offer affirming affirmations to loved ones throughout the day? So think about that, and then let's move on. Let's move on from smartphones and diets and exercise and all of these individual-focused things, and let's think about the way our habits impact the larger world. This is a church that cares very much about how the larger world is being affected. We want a fairer world. We want a more just world. How can we contribute to that world? What kind of habits can we cultivate that will affect systemic change in the world? Well, for one thing, let's not forget about those habits that make us better people, because becoming a better person addresses the system. We are all part of this system. So if we can be kinder, if we can be fairer, more compassionate, better listeners, more generous, then the world changes around us. But beyond that, I'd like to mention two other groups of habits that affect larger systems. And the second one, I think, brings us back to creating alternative communities. So first, one set of habits involves ways to increase our support for organizations that are seeking to address systemic change. Nonprofits that are working to change the system. You know, we are all individuals in a very populated state, the state of California, very big state. And then we're also all citizens of the United States, this humongous system. It can feel very easily like we don't have a lot of influence as individuals on those systems. But the nonprofit organizations that we support can be a bridge between our individual influence and the change that we can affect on a larger scale. We can support those organizations by the habits that we cultivate. Of course, that can mean giving money regularly, but it can also mean signing those petitions when you get the petition in the email, liking their stuff on social media, reading the emails to know what's going on. Note, all of that stuff requires smartphones and devices, ways that those can be used for good. But then also those things should then send us out into the world if we are able. If we're able then to go out into the world, that's what, they are inviting us from a virtual interactions to face-to-face live interactions. And so responding to those. Voting, of course, is a habit that we should get into, being involved in local government, all being informed by these organizations that are part of our values. So that's one thing. We cultivate habits that support organizations that are seeking to reform our current system. The second habit is related but different, because supporting organizations for change is about reformation of the current system. But we live in this world where the unjust structures and systems are so massive and so powerful and so entrenched that we should be working not on just reforming those, but on creating alternative structures and alternative systems. And the local church, the local congregation, can be one of those alternative structures, should be one of those alternative structures. A church is a community that's not just about changing individuals or advocating for change in the world, but building an alternative community founded on different values than the rest of society, founded on faith, founded on love, founded on justice, founded on the value of every single person who walks in our door, founded on the welcome that we provide to all those people who come, and allowing people to be part of the decision-making of the body that might not get that chance out in the world. One way to think about this, or perhaps measure how well we're doing, is if there were a major social crisis, a natural disaster, or maybe a failure of civic institutions. I'll get dystopian on you here, okay? So if there were a real crisis out in the world, would this church, or could this church, be a place where the members would turn to for support in that crisis? And could this place be a place where the community turned to and support during that crisis? Have we built a structure that's strong enough so that when things aren't working out there, they keep working in here? And we might not be there. We might not be there yet, but the question is, how do we get there? Habits. We start with our habits. We start with attending church on Sunday mornings as regularly as possible. We make financial support for the church part of our regular budget. We read those weekly emails, respond to the links, volunteer, show up, get involved, build relationships, and we contribute ourselves to the work of the community. That means getting on those engagement teams or those committees that are doing the work and giving our own aspirations to the community as well. So, how are we going to grow in wisdom and maturity and divine and human favor in the coming year? What habits are we going to practice? What habits are you going to practice now, today, and for the coming days that are going to build yourself into a better person, build our church into a stronger church, and build our world into a stronger world? All of that work starts with the things we do every day. Amen.